Nature cannot be like that, that it is only current, no wave allowed. It is only wave, no current allowed. Nature doesn't mean like that. It is we human being, we do this kind of the separation. Nature doesn't mean any separation. So even if you have a purely wave, there can be a current component. Even if you have a purely current, there can be a wave component. Now, the subordinate component is how much strong. Depending on that its effect come on the structure. Similarly, sometimes it happens that the subordinate factor that becomes sufficiently strong, and then we call those kind of ripples as combined ripples. Now, first I discuss about the wave ripple. Now, wave ripple, as we discussed, it is symmetric in profile. This is number one. Number two, that if you see the crest line, that the ripple crest line, wave bed from crest line, they will always show a bifurcation. There will be no current ripple that will show you a bifurcation. Crest bifurcation is a telltale criteria for identifying a wave ripple. Crest bifurcation. Number three, the ripple index. Ripple index. What is ripple index? Ripple index, that is Ri, which is actually wavelength divided by amplitude. So if I have a what is a ripple index? Ripple, it is a wave ripple, symmetric in profile. I have done symmetric in profile, and then ripple index is wavelength by amplitude. And how we define the wavelength? We define the wavelength to the maximum, that is the crestal point or two successive bed form. That is the difference, that is the wavelength. And the amplitude is from the trough to the crest. What is the amplitude? So W by A, that is the. Now if you have a current ripple commonly has ripple index more than 15. And in many cases we also get from the current ripples which can go down maximum up to 12. So characteristically, current ripple has ripple index more than 15, but we also get current ripples where we get the ripple index 12 to 15. Okay? Wave ripple, characteristically, they will show you ripple index 8 to 12. So much lesser is the ripple index. So if you have the typical swash wave, that means when the marine wave that comes and breaks, that the swash ripple typically has the wavelength 8 to 10, ripple index 8 to 10. Now, how really the wave ripples formed? Wave ripples formed by means of the action of the wave on the sandy surface. Action of wave on the sandy surface. So if I have a sandy surface and there is a wave, so this is the water depth. I have drawn this. There is a sandy surface, and above that there is a water depth, and a wave is operating on the surface of the water. So there are series of waves. Now it all depends. So how waves are created? Waves are created by means of the shear of wind on the surface of the water. Shear of wind. So the wind shear on the surface of water, that actually creates wave. Now, up to what depth this effect of wave will be there? The effect of wave, if it is a gravity wave, so that effect is defined by the wave base. We call it wave base. And what is actually the wave base? Actually, when you have a wave, it has an oscillatory motion. So it is like a pendulum, the water particle is oscillating. So this oscillatory motion from the top surface where the wind is putting the shear, as you go through the water depth, this oscillatory motion and the amplitude of the oscillation, that goes down. And finally the energy that dissipates as you go down into the water column. Up to which the energy of the wave dissipates downward, that we call the wave base. Now, you see there are several waves. Now, this wave, the first wave, its wave base doesn't touch the surface. Whereas the next wave, its wave base touch the surface. Third wave, again, does not touch the surface. Now, what does this mean? That this wave actually will have no effect on the sediment movement, because its entire energy is dissipating within the water column. But this wave, second wave, as it is touching the water, sediment surface, so it will cause the sediment to move. So all depends upon that what is the amplitude of the wave, what is the wavelength of the wave, what is the shear of the air on the surface of the water, and what energy it is transferring to the water column. Depending on that, the depth of the wave, that is the wave base, that will be varying, and your sediment surface, if it cuts the wave base, that means your wave is cutting, your wave base is so low that it is cutting the sediment surface, then wave will start moving the grain on the surface, otherwise not. Am I clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then if the wave that is, so that suppose I do not get any wave signature somewhere, that doesn't mean that wave was not operative there. Wave may have been operative, but the energy has not touched the sediment surface. So I will not get any proof that the wave was operative at that time. Now, I come to the combined. Now, combined ripple, they are also common in the geological record. Now, what I have said, that the current ripple will have a asymmetric profile, and the wave ripple will have a crest bifurcation, but it will have a symmetric profile. When I get the mixture of two criteria together in a ripple, suppose I am seeing the crest bifurcation, but at the same time the ripple is showing a asymmetric profile. How I explain that? This kind of situation, when it arises, that I am getting a signature of both of it, that kind of ripple, people, I am telling you the name of the person who first proposed it, and then people supported it. Dalrymple, Swift, they are big people of research in this line. And these people, they describe that the combined ripple, you will get the signature of both of them combined, and they are basically the reflection of the combined action of both the agents. So what I discussed, separately the product of current, separately the product of wave, but you will always be very careful when you see that you should not neglect the feature in a field. In a field, whatever you will be seeing, that feature should be noted faithfully. I am seeing a crest bifurcation. I have seen lot of people. I have seen my students. They have seen that the crest bifurcation, despite they are seeing it is a asymmetric profile, they are noting it as a symmetric profile. because crest bifurcation आ रहा है, wave ripple हो रहा है, it should be a symmetric form. No, it can also have a asymmetric form if you have the effect of both the agents. Fine. Now this saying this, now I will be entering. I will proceed from where I have stopped in the last class. I discussed the syn sedimentary deformation feature. Up to that I discussed. Today I will start discussing from the trace fossil or the ichnofossil, which is again another kind of the sedimentary structure and which is of immense importance. Now we also call it the ichnofossil or trace fossil. Now trace fossil, actually it is a organism sediment interaction, and it can be of three different size, three different types. Number one, biostratification. Number two, bioerosion or bioturbation. Number three, excrement. So there are three different types. That is the types that people, the biostratification. That means it is a kind of biostrata. What people actually describe, that we know that in the Precambrian limestone succession we get the beautiful stromatolites. And these stromatolites, they are anti-gravity structure. They are algal or bacterial mats which are basically show a anti-gravity structure. Now there is a debate whether we should call it a trace fossil or we should not call it a trace fossil, because it is an organic structure, but whether it is ideal that it is an organic activity. Somebody believe that because they are organic mat and it signifies the organic activity, we should call it a trace fossil. Some people believe no, it is not a kind of burrow, boring or the feeding, all this kind of structure. It doesn't fall under this category, so we should not call it a trace fossil. So a debate exists that whether stromatolite be called a trace fossil or not. But there are a number of other structures which are definitely we identify as a trace fossil. Now, you tell me that between a body fossil and a trace fossil, which one will be better paleo-environmental indicator? Between a body fossil and a trace fossil, which one will be a better paleo-environment indicator? I want the answer from you and the reason behind it. You all have studied trace fossil in your undergraduate. Anyone can give the answer that between a body fossil and a trace fossil, which is better paleo environment indicator and why? No answer? Anyway, between a body fossil and a trace fossil is always a better paleo environment indicator. Why? The reason is that trace fossil is a mark of organism on the sediment. You cannot transport it. If you want to transport it, if you want to rework it, it will get destroyed, it will get broken. But a body fossil can always be transported. A body fossil can go from one place to another place by process of any kind of flow. So where I am getting the body fossil today, that may not be its original place of the generation. But a trace fossil, if I get in a rock strata, it always shows that it is a product of the same environment where I am getting it today. It cannot be reworked. A reworked trace fossil will always be destroyed. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Is the point very clear to you?
Yes,
That
sir.
why trace fossil is a better indicator of paleo environment? Because it always show a in situ character. In situ character. It always show the original place of its origin. Original place of its origin. Whereas a body fossil can always be reworked. Always be reworked. Now, how to classify the trace fossils? How to classify the trace fossils? Now, one major thing you must understand, that why trace fossils, the classification, why it is important. Initially, there are two classification schemes of trace fossil. One is the scheme of Martinsen, and another is the scheme of Xyleser. Scheme of Martinsen and scheme of Xyleser. Okay? What is the difference between the two schemes? Martinsen tried to classify the trace fossils based on an occurrence within a bed. Suppose it is on the surface of a bed, it is within a bed, or it is outside the bed. Depending on that, he tried to classify. I am showing you how he did it. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what Martinsen tried to do, he tried to classify the trace fossil based on whether it is on the surface of a bed, it is within a bed, or it is outside the bed. So he said that it will be named as epichnia, endichnia, exichnia, depending on that whether I am seeing the trace fossil on the surface, within, or outside the bed. So it was a topological classification. We call it a topological classification. Topological classification. Okay. Now, first Martinsen, he tried to give this kind of classification, but there are a lot of people, they criticize this classification. They said that depending on where in the bed it is lying, we are not getting any idea that what kind of organism it has made, what is the environmental condition, and under what circumstance the organism was forced to make this kind of trace, which is our main aim. So people said, no, this is not enough, that you are only classifying the trace fossil based on its relationship within a bed. It will not give any idea about the organism or the environment, which is our main goal. So Xyleser, he came out with a classification. First I draw the classification, then I will discuss. Now, one thing I first say, that all organisms, irrespective of its genus and species, they behave similarly in similar environmental condition. If you take a dog, a cat, or me, in the deep ocean, all of us will be struggling in the deep ocean, and all of us will try to have oxygen and will gasping. If we take me, a dog, and a cat in the Antarctic, all of us will feel cold. And if you take all three of us to desert, Sahara desert, all of us will feel very hot, isn't it? So organisms, their behavior is the environment controlled. Organisms' behavior is environment controlled, and then hence if I try to analyze the behavior of an organism, I can talk about the possible environmental condition. Is it clear? Please draw it, then I will discuss. And please let me know after you complete your drawing. This is xylochair classification. Xylochair classification. Should I take it up or down? Is okay? All the terms are visible. Should I read it out or not?
No, sir. You have kept it little below. So can you read the terms,
Yeah.
for the fossils?
So it starts with trypanite, Trypanites, trypanites. Then glossy fungites, GLOSSIFUNGITES, glossy fungites. Then scolithos, SKALITHOS. Then cruziana, CRUZIANA, cruziana. Then zoophycos, and planolites. एंड ऊपर में लिखा हुआ है स्क्वेनिया, SCOYENIA.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, so this is Xylecher classification, and what he tried to do in his classification is that he tried to arrange the different genus and species. So these what I have written, these are genus. I have not gone to the species. So different genus of trace fossil or ichnofossil depending on relative water depth, depending on and their type of activity, whether they are infaunal or epifaunal. What is infaunal? Where the respiration of the organism they are doing within the sediment. And the epifaunal, when their respiratory tract they are keeping above the sediment surface. I am sure. Is it clear to you? Infaunal and epifaunal. That when organisms they are keeping the respiratory tract within the sediment, and the organism keeping their respiratory tract above the sediment surface. Depending on that, so whether what are the criteria he followed? Number one, whether infaunal or epifaunal. Number two, the horizontal or bedding plane surface, bedding plane structure, or vertical. If vertical, at what angle? Number three is that the type of activity. It can be a locomotive activity. It can be a feeding activity, feeding. It can be a resting activity, resting. So all these that he considered to characterize the different genus of trace fossil. Okay, and what he said that the trace fossils what we get on the land surface, not marine surface, on a land surface, that is actually the continental trace fossil, that and the woody surface, rocky surface, that is actually they call it scoenia. If it is a woody, rocky continental surface on which you have the trace fossil, you call it scoenia. Tripanites are those which are on a hard marine surface. The hard marine surface, near shore hard marine surface, where you get the vertical burrows, you call it tripanite. Glossy fungites, they are actually on a surface which has a shifting sand, and it is a low inclination infernal burrow. That is glossy fungi. Scolithos is on a sandy shore and a high energy sandy shore, and the scolithos is mostly, it is vertical burrows. Because if you have a high energy, organisms will always try to escape from that energy by making the vertical burrows. The more you go to the lower energy, the organisms are more happily staying on the surface. More you give the high energy, organism will try to escape from the high energy by making the vertical burrows. This is a general tendency. So more I get the hospitable condition, we all go to, there is very good weather, so we go out for the dining and go to the restaurant, but very hot, there is a hot air blowing, we always try to be within the home and in the AC. We escape. But when it is a very convenient and good weather, we always go out for dining. It is same with organisms. Very high energy, they try to escape. A very low energy, then they try to be on the surface, try to feed on the surface, try to happily roam around on the surface. So accordingly, then after the scolithos, you get the cruziana. This has come from the term crazy. So now the organisms has become crazy. They have got a reasonably hospitable condition, and they are freely moving here and there. So that is a cruziana. They are more lower energy condition. Further lower energy condition, zoophycos and planolites, where it is mostly the bedding plane structure, organisms are mostly happily staying on the surface. So from the more dominance of the vertical burrows, you are now getting more of the horizontal traces and tracks and that kind of stuff. And accordingly, based on these different characters of the structures, we interpret the relative energy condition at a particular place. If I get more vertical burrows, if I get that it is a low angle or the intermediate angle infernal burrows, then we always say that it is a relatively higher energy condition. Whereas if I get that the organisms are staying on the surface, they are feeding on the surface, making circular burrows, making elliptical burrows, and they are roaming happily on the surface, then we call that it is a much lower energy condition and the more hospitable condition for the organisms to stay and feed on the surface. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So with this, I end the trace fossil. Now we have discussed all the type of sedimentary structure, including the subsediment structure, the trace fossil, everything. Now one major goal for our different kind of structure, suppose the primary sedimentary structure, the ripple, the plane, your current crescent, your flute mark. That is one major idea is the paleocurrent determination. So paleocurrent, that ancient past, if I see any geological record in a basin, what was the current operative at that time? So paleocurrent. Which is very, very important when we go for any kind of hydrocarbon exploration, because a paleocurrent will actually tell you what is the proximal part of the basin, what is the distal part of the basin, from which side the exploration has to be taken to which side. So all these are basically the need of a geologist, a sedimentologist, a petroleum geologist, a basin analyst. A major goal is to determine the paleocurrent direction. Now, paleocurrent, you all have studied paleocurrent, I know. But I just want to check that what really you know about the paleocurrent. What are the scalar attributes of paleocurrent? What are the scalar attributes of paleocurrent? And what are the vector attributes of paleocurrent? Please don't be paleocurrent. You all have studied in your undergraduate, isn't it? Please answer. You people have studied paleocurrent in undergraduate. Am I wrong?
No, sir. Yes,
Okay.
studied.
Now tell me that what are the scalar attributes of paleocurrent and what are the vector attributes of paleocurrent? A very simple question. Anyway, I am telling you. Paleocurrent is determined based on two types of attributes. One is scalar attribute, scalar, another is vector. What we consider in a scalar attribute, as we know, scalar has one dimension, vector has two dimensions. Okay? Scalar attribute, we consider the grain size and grain roundness. Whereas vector attributes, we take the primary sedimentary structure. What are those? What are those? We take the crostata, flute, current crescent, these are the main structures from which we do the vector. We do the and the ripple asymmetry. So scalar and vector. Scalar and vector. Scalar and vector. Now, how we do it by scalar? That if you see that decrease in grain size or increase in roundness, that will always happen in the down current direction. In the down current direction, we will always have a decrease in grain size or increase in grain roundness. That is an indicator of the direction of the paleocurrent. That is what people have talked about. That I will have a decrease in grain size or increase in. Now, suppose this is distance. This is the curve that if I put the with respect to distance, high and low, the grain size and the roundness curve, that comes like this. Draw the curve, then I discuss. Done?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now see, true, that in the down current direction, it is true that in the down current direction, the grain size decreases and the roundness increases. But it doesn't go indefinite decrease in size or indefinite increase in the roundness. The roundness curve, it increases and then becomes steady. After a certain time, you cannot increase the roundness of the grain further. Similarly, after a certain time, you cannot further decrease the size of a grain. They stabilizes. So if I have a point here and I have a point here, I can say, okay, from this side to this side is the current direction. But if I compare one point here and one point here, can we say which one is proximal, which one is distal? I cannot. Because both these parameters, they stabilizes after a certain distance. And that becomes a major problem, that once that critical distance is exceeded, then how you will identify what is the proximal, what is the distal. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
There is another problem. Suppose it is the whole exercise I am doing in the subsurface. It is not on the surface. And I am collecting the sample from the subsurface by means of coring. And suppose I made a core 1 and I made a core 2. I made a core 1 and core 2. And what I found, that core 1, the grain size and the grain size is coarser than the core 2. And core 1, the grain roundness is less than the core 2. Then I say that from the paleocurrent direction is towards core 2. Now, somebody else, he did another core at 3. What he found, that in 3, the decrease in size is more than the core 2. And the increase in roundness is more than the core 2. So in that case, the first interpretation changes, and then you say, no, it is not towards 2, it is towards 3. You see that problem. So based on scalar, you cannot do less than 3 data a interpretation of the paleocurrent. Minimum 3 data is necessary. From 2 data you cannot do it. This is another major problem. Whereas in a vector, even a single data may be very conclusive. Though we rely on lot of data, but even one single data can give you lot of clue. That is the importance of a vector data. Okay? Now, when I talk about the vector data, as I had discussed, that the vector data, it will be the cross data orientation, fluid direction, current crescent direction, ripple asymmetry. All these, they have a vector attribute. Now, what we do, we by means of a clinometer or a Brunton compass, we measure the direction of the down current direction. Then in an area, what we do, we divide the area in the form of a grid. We divide the area in the form of a grid, and from each quadrant of the grid, we measure a number of data. Suppose 20, 25, 30, 40, 50, as much as possible. The data is measured and the whole area is covered. Based on that, each sector from each quadrant, as much possible data that we take. Okay? Then the data, that is basically what we refer to as the Rose diagram. Rose diagram. We plot the data in a Rose diagram and do some statistical analysis. Now, what is Rose diagram? Once we get, suppose I get a data, something like this. Suppose this is my data set. I have just made a data set. Okay. Once I get this data set, now what are these data? That with respect to north, what is the direction that I have got? With respect to north, what is the direction I have got? That I have noted. The more the data, more precise will be your analysis. Okay. Now my aim will be first to classify the data, that we should determine a class interval. The class interval, it depends on you. You can take a 10-degree class interval, somebody can take 15-degree class interval, somebody 20-degree. It all depends on your data and how you classify your data. I am classifying my data based on 10-degree class interval. So what I am doing, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, and 60 to 70. This is class interval. And then next will be the frequency. So 5, 6, 3, 6, 4. So what we do, the class interval and frequency. So class intervals, 10-degree class interval, and in each interval, what is the number of data? What is the number of data? That is the frequency of that class interval. Okay. If someone has any confusion, please ask me. You people have already done it, isn't it, in the undergraduate?
No, sir.
Okay.
We didn't.
So class interval and frequency. Now, what we will do? We will take a north-south, east-west. Now you see, I have plotted this, and this is north, south, east, west. And if I say that this is 0, 360, 90, 180, 270. So this is the entire plot. 0, 360, 90, 180, 270. What I am doing, that I have identified from 20 to 30, there are 5 data. I consider one data as one data is 1 centimeter, equal to 1 centimeter. One data is 1 centimeter. So I draw a line along 20 degree and also a line along 30 degree, and then measure 5 centimeter representing 5 data, that is the frequency, and join it. Then the next is 6 data. So I increase the line up to 6 centimeter and then join it. So these are like the petals of a rose. Petals of a rose. Rose ki papdi ke jaisa. Petals of a rose. We actually plot this data like this. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, once you have plotted the data, then the question comes that how I will get a vector mean, because it is a vector diagram. There is a magnitude. You are giving 5 data, 6 data is a magnitude, and there is an angle, that is the direction. So it is a vector data which has a direction and a magnitude. Now I want to have this data because number of petals, it will not give me any mean direction. I want to know when I will describe to somebody what is the paleocurrent direction, I want to emphasize on a single direction, which is the mean direction of the entire data set. Okay? So, how I really do it? The mean direction. So, what we do, that the midpoint of class interval, we take the midpoint. So 20 to 30 midpoint 25, 30 to 40 midpoint 35, 40 to 50 midpoint 45, 50 to 60 55 and 65. Okay, now midpoint. So and the n value is n value is 5, 6, 3, 6, 4. These are all n values. So what we do, that is n1 sine theta 1 plus n2 sine theta 2, like this. Then n1 cos theta 1 where plus n2 cos theta 2, like this. Where theta 1, theta 2 is the midpoint of the class interval. Okay? So what you finally get? You get sigma ni sine theta I equal to sigma ni cos theta I. Okay? Is it okay up till now? Hello?
Sir, n here is the number of data in that.
Yeah, frequency. तुम ऊपर का टेबल देखो, टेबल में मैं लिख दिया
Yes, sir, yes.
n1 n2. Yeah. So now what will be the mean direction? So if tan theta m, this is equal to you first see the figure, what the mean direction, that is theta m. Okay, then tan theta m will be sigma ni sin I divided by sigma ni cos I. So that value, so the what will be the theta m? Theta m will be tan inverse sigma ni sin theta I by sigma ni cos theta I. We will do the practical exercise on it. From this Thursday, practical will start. I will, hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I will mail you people the graph sheet and the problem. You please take the printout of the, I will send the semi-logarithmic graph sheet. Please take a good printout of the semi-logarithmic graph sheet so that we can start the practical from next Thursday, and next Thursday we'll start the practical.
So we are calculating theta 1 and theta 2 from the Rose diagram.
या नहीं ये जो थीटा 1 थीटा 2 ये तो तुम्हारा जो क्लास इंटरवल मिड पॉइंट ऑफ द क्लास इंटरवल, तुम देखो मिड पॉइंट मैं एक रो बनाया हूं टेबल में, जो मिड पॉइंट है ना.
Yes, sir.
So suppose the first midpoint is 25 and n is 5. So it will be 5 sine 25, 5 cos 25.
Okay, sir.
Now, what will be the magnitude of the vector? So direction of the vector तो निकल गया. Direction of the vector निकल गया. What will be the magnitude? Magnitude will be here. This will be the magnitude of the vector. Root over of sigma ni sin I square plus sigma ni cos I square. That is the vector magnitude. Okay. Now, characteristic paleocurrent pattern for the different environment. You first draw it. Is it visible? Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let me know once it is done. Is it done?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Just I am taking 1 minute leave. I will be joining within a minute. Now, to see in this figure, I have tried to show, sorry. In this figure, I have tried to show the characteristic pattern of the paleocurrent in the different environment. 4 different figures I have shown. One is the unimodal low dispersion, and I have written it for the braided fluvial system. Same unimodal pattern we also get in the meandering fluvial, but dispersion becomes very high because in a meandering stream, your channel system, it meanders. So the paleocurrent also deviates a lot. So dispersion becomes very high. A tide typically is a flood and ebb, 180-degree apart flow. So a tide necessarily will give you a bipolar pattern. Now, is there any meaning of the mean vector in a bipolar pattern? If I do a mean, then the mean will come in between the two modes. Actually, in that, there is no data. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
So, mean has no meaning when you are dealing with a bipolar paleocurrent pattern. There is no meaning. There are softwares now available. You can put the data, software give you all the analysis. It gives you the Rose diagram, gives you the mean direction, gives you the mean strength, everything. It also gives you a mean for a bipolar data, which is a nonsense. And that's why I never use the software. You understand the problem? Because सॉफ्टवेयर तो तुम कुछ भी डेटा दोगे तो दे देगा अपना मीन, वो नहीं देखेगा कि सही में उस डायरेक्शन में कोई फ्लो हुआ था कि नहीं हुआ था. Whether there was any flow in that direction, it hardly bothers. So what we will do? In this case, bipolar, we will separately identify the mean for the two different directions. So we will do one mean for this and one mean for this. We will do one mean for this and one mean for this. Then we will say the mean flood direction is this, mean ebb direction is this. Then come on to the shallow marine. This is a bimodal, not bipolar, bimodal. There are more than one mode. Here also, if you mix all data, the mean has no value. Mean actually has value when you have a unimodal data. Then you can club all data and identify the mean. For any other kind of analysis, okay? I think it is clear.
Yes, sir.
Now, the next question comes. Does paleocurrent indicate paleoslope? We all know the flow always occurs in downslope direction. Does paleocurrent necessarily indicate paleoslope? Is my question clear? My question is, does paleocurrent necessarily indicate paleoslope? चुप क्यों हो, बताओ ना.
Yes, sir, it should. I'm not sure though.
हाँ,
So करना तो चाहिए.
करना चाहिए. Now he says करना चाहिए, paleocurrent should indicate paleoslope. Do you feel in case of air, aeolian flow, the air will follow the paleoslope?
No, sir.
Yes. So, yes, it is true that in many cases paleocurrent indicates paleoslope, but in case of aeolian deposit, in case of shallow marine deposit, in both the cases, aeolian and shallow marine, the paleocurrent may not necessarily indicate a paleoslope. There are many shore parallel currents. There are, and characteristically, air will never follow the any slope. Air can act irrespective of any slope. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
अच्छा, एयर में होता क्या है? What happens in air? That air, how air transports sediment. How air का बात आया तो then it came to my mind. How air transports sediment. Actually, air needs a threshold velocity for the initiation of any sediment movement. There it requires a threshold velocity. Very weak air, it may not be, it only takes some dust in the suspension. So there are two things, that air takes the finest of the particle, that dust in the suspension, and air moves the fine sand, fine to medium sand as a bed load, which forms the large scale aeolian dunes, which you see in different photographs and different hero and heroine dancing in the aeolian dune. So I am not going into that. So the aeolian dune, that is the movement of the sand grain forming the large dune, and some finest sediment, they remain in suspension in the air in the form of dust. Now for the bed load movement of air, you require a threshold velocity of the air which can start the movement of the grain. But even air, when does not reach a threshold movement, before that the air goes on, strikes on the ground, and the sediment rolls on the surface, but active movement utna hota nahi hai. This rolling of the sediment sand grain on the sandy surface, before it reaches to the threshold velocity to go for active movement, this, the rolling, we call that term as a seeding, seeding. That means that the air is throwing sand into the surface, it is starts rolling, but do not go for the active movement. There, before the active movement, the rolling of the sand grain within the sandy surface, we call it seeding, SEEDing, seeding. So एयर में एक तो जो डस्ट फॉर्म में मूव होता है सस्पेंशन, एक होता है जो सीडिंग होती है, ग्रेन रोल करती है, एंड एक एक्टिव मूवमेंट होती है बेड लोड के हिसाब से, दैट इज द थ्रेशोल्ड मूवमेंट, क्रिटिकल थ्रेशोल्ड मूवमेंट. सो ये तीन मूवमेंट होती है. ओके.
So what will
Yeah.
happen in case
Yes,
of hydraulic jump? In
No,
that case
hydraulic
also?
jump is hydraulic jump is a completely different thing. Hydraulic jump is actually when you change the flow from upper, there is a slope change and the flow change. So hydraulic jump, suppose there is a dam, when the dam releases the water. So what will happen, that where the water first strikes the ground, then you say the reverse flow that happens. That is typically the hydraulic jump. That is the hydraulic jump. Hydraulic jump you do not get here. Hydraulic jump is actually we discussed na antidune. Antidune is normally a product of the hydraulic jump. Hydraulic jump is a change in slope and sudden change in the flow regime of the flow regime. So the energy shift, that is the hydraulic jump.
Okay, sir.
Anybody else who was asking me something? Somebody else also asking me. Okay. So far we have discussed the sedimentary structure and all. Now we will be discussing, we will come into, before we go into the environment discussion, we have some more discussion to do, because I will start environment discussion sometime in the next class or the next to next class. Before that, I have some more discussion. The first discussion is that, which is a repetition of your earlier course in the undergraduate, that is the description of the sedimentary rock, what kind of interpretation we get in terms of the tectonics, in terms of the diagenesis, in terms of the provenance, in terms of the all these, because of the classification of the sedimentary rock and its interpretation in terms of all this process, its diagenesis, its tectonic setting, or in terms of its original climatic condition or tectonic condition in which the sediment is delivered. So for that, as you all know, that there is a famous classification of the sandstone, and we this is very well known to all of you. So a sedimentary rock is a clastic sedimentary rock I am talking about, is made up of three components. One is a framework, another is matrix, another is cement. So framework, matrix and cement. Framework, matrix and cement. What is the difference between matrix and cement? What is the difference between matrix and cement? You know very well. Don't be hesitant.
Sir, matrix are fine material which fills the intergranular space.
Absolutely.
And cements are secondary material which binds the matrix and the grain together.
Okay. So whatever he said, it is about 70 to 80% correct. Matrix and framework, both are detrital in origin. Matrix is the finer, he mentioned it. It is the finer counterpart of the detrital constituent. It has come as a detritus. as a data item. It is come as a mechanical process, no chemical process involved in matrix. They have come along with the larger grain and filled the interspaces between the larger grain. Fine. Then he said the cement is secondary. He is right that cement, I will not say secondary, but it is either the syn depositional or post depositional. I will not term it secondary. I will call it syn depositional or post depositional, which is actually a chemically precipitated between the grains, and which is said is correct. It actually binds the entire rock. So one is a mechanically deposited, matrix is mechanically deposited, cement is chemically precipitated. If I ask that what is the difference between matrix and cement, the first sentence you should utter that matrix is mechanically deposited, cement is chemically precipitated. If this sentence you utter, that means you are sure that what is the difference between the two. One sentence. Matrix is mechanically deposited, cement is chemically precipitated. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
So, suppose in an interview, somebody asks you, what is the difference between matrix and cement? You should say one sentence. Matrix is chemically deposited, cement is matrix is mechanically deposited, cement is chemically precipitated. Then the person who has asked you a question, he is totally satisfied. Totally satisfied. Now, we take the in the classification, we actually do not take any cognizance of the cement. We only take cognizance of the framework and matrix. So the original classification of sandstone do not take into account the effect of cement. What are the kind of cement we normally get in sandstone? Number one, siliceous cement. Number two, ferruginous cement. Number three, carbonate cement. And very rare cases, gluconite cement. Gluconite cement. ये चार तरीके के सीमेंट मिलते हैं. Siliceous cement, ferruginous cement, carbonate cement, and gluconitic cement. Now siliceous cement, ये सब जब पेट्रोग्राफी डिस्कस करेंगे तब डिस्कस करेंगे कि कैसे सिलिशियस सीमेंट आइडेंटिफाई किया जाता है. I am extremely upset that I may not be able to show you the microscope. ये जो कोरोना अभी जो हालत में है, इस सेमेस्टर भी ये ऑनलाइन में ही जाएगा. And I am heavily pained in my heart that I cannot show the students the microscope. No substitute of showing it under microscope. No substitute. वो feeling ही नहीं आएगा. Now, This is a known figure to all of you, very known figure to all of you. I just redrawn it to show you that this is a prismatic, this is a prism, and I have carved different sections of the prism. And as I cut the prism, it makes a triangular shape. 3 vertices are quartz, feldspar, and lithic fragment. And if there is a boundary of 12.5%, so horizontal axis is the matrix content, and 3 vertices are the 3 constituent grains of the sandstone. Up to 12.5% matrix content, we call them arenites. And more than 12.5% the matrix content, then you call it a wake. We get the quartz arenite if in the arenite quartz percentage is more than 90 to 95%. Otherwise, you call it the arkose if the feldspar content is more than 25%, or you call it feldspathic arenite if it is more than 7 to 8% feldspar content. Similarly, sublith arenite and the lith arenite, and more than the 25% the matrix content, then it is gone to the mudstone. This is a very common diagram. Okay. Now, what are the major things that in the diagram is considered? First of all, it considered that what is the relative abundance of quartz, feldspar, and lithic fragment. That they talked about the mineralogical maturity. That means the more you get, the more stable mineral quartz, this is more mineralogically mature. And the second criteria that is followed is the matrix content. That is textural maturity. So mineralogical maturity and textural maturity. Textural maturity, the lesser the matrix content, higher is the textural maturity. So accordingly, both on the basis of mineralogical maturity and textural maturity, quartz arenites are the most matured sediment. Quartz arenite is most matured sediment, which is both mineralogically matured and texturally matured. Okay. Now, can we get a quartz arenite as a first cycle sediment? No. We cannot have a quartz arenite as a first cycle sediment, because if we start with a granite, then the granite first it will give you a arkose, then it will give you a subarkose, and finally it will give a quartz arenite. So a quartz arenite is necessarily a multicyclic sediment. So a granite, starting from a granite, if I want to have a quartz arenite, I have to undertake the sediment into several cycles of sedimentation to remove the feldspar and the unstable grain from it and make the grain quartz arenite. So quartz arenite, it is normally what we get, that the quartz arenite is typically a product of humid tropical areas. Humid tropical areas where you get lot of water which can eliminate the feldspars from it, and you get large amount of water flow to recycle the sediment time and again. So humid tropical area. So after multicyclic sedimentation, I can have a quartz arenite to be formed from a granitic source. Am I clear?
Yes.
Now, very hurriedly I will go through it because all these things you have already read. Now, coming on to arkose. What is arkose? That you have a high feldspar content. Now, feldspar is an unstable mineral. If feldspar is an unstable mineral, then how can I have a arkose present in a Paleozoic rock? in a Precambrian rock, in a Mesozoic rock, such an unstable mineral, how can it be preserved for a long time and I am getting a arcosic sediment? That is a problem. Because it is an unstable mineral and I am getting it in such a old rock. 200 million year back rock, that is Arkos. 300 million year back rock, that is Arkos. How can it be? So that is a typically called the feldspar problem of Arkos. So then people first try to say it, no, feldspar would not get decomposed because when it was deposited, the weather was very arid. There was no availability of much water, and that's why the feldspar got preserved. That was the first theory people said. That yes, you are getting Arkos in old rocks because at that time when the sediment was deposited, that it was an arid climate. But then what people observed, even in the tropical region, in some of the tropical region, when people studied the soil profile, they found the presence of fresh feldspar. Then how can, if the climate aridity is the only criteria, in that case, how I am getting fresh feldspar in a tropical soil profile where there is lot of water? How their feldspar is preserved? Then this, if you read the book of Potter, Pettigen, Shiver, there is a beautiful discussion on it. Potter, Pettigen, Shiver, sand and sandstone. Potter, Pettigen, Shiver. Then people said, no, yes, climate has a role to preserve, but tectonics has a much larger role. How? If I have a tectonically active terrain, and tectonically active terrain is likely to supply more feldspar, tectonically active terrain. Then as a tectonically active terrain, it shed lot of sediment. So the sediment which is supplied gets buried very quickly. Because lot of sediment, that is tectonically active sediment, it supplies lot of sediment. So any feldspar that gets buried and it does not come into contact of the surface water, and you can even have a fresh feldspar preserved because of the high sedimentation rate in a tropical climate. So aridity of climate is not the only or the sole criteria needed. You have to have a high tectonics for preservation of the feldspar. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is how,
सर अगर क्वार्ज डिराइव हो रहा है मतलब मेटामॉर्फिक रॉक से, लाइक क्वार्जाइट से डायरेक्टली डिराइव हो रहा है, तो वहां पे तो हम कह सकते हैं कि ये फर्स्ट साइकिल से क्वार्ज आयरनेट फॉर्म हो सकता है.
No, yes, that is not a issue, but the thing is that there is a very less. There are other ways I will discuss how we will be saying that it is a first cycle quartz derived from, as he is saying, from a metamorphic low grade metamorphic quartzitic rock. There is a way of determining that yes, it is derived from a low grade metamorphic. I will come to that and I will discuss that. What is the criteria that will follow?
Okay.
How we differentiate a quartz supplied from a low grade metamorphic rock from a plutonic rock. कैसे हम लोग करते हैं, we'll discuss that. Now, this is the feldspar problem of, and people try to justify that. Then I will discuss another rock which is very, very typical. Quartz joaquet. You see, there is a sedimentary rock called quartz joaquet. A quartz joaquet, how you define quartz joaquet? Quartz mineralogically very mature, joaquet texturally very immature. Now, how that kind of sediment I can find? Quartz joaquet. It is very typical. I am not giving you answer. You people identify the answer. मैं आज आंसर नहीं दे रहा हूं. If anyone can give me answer right now, how a quartz joaquet sediment can form, or I am giving you time. Next day, you people tell me how a quartz joaquet sediment I can get. ये क्वार्ट्ज मिनरोलॉजिकली मैच्योर, वाके टेक्सचरली इमैच्योर। ये दोनों चीज एक साथ कैसे हो रहा है? कौन सी सिचुएशन में क्वार्ट्ज वाके हो सकते हैं? Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
ये नेक्स्ट क्लास मेरे को बताना ये क्वार्ट्ज वाके कैसे हो सकते हैं। नाउ आई एम कमिंग इनटू द लीथ एरेनाइट एंड लीथ वाके। लीथ एरेनाइट एंड लीथ वाके। I am actually not going to the normal description. I am only highlighting the issues which is actually people bother. मैं वही हाईलाइट कर रहा हूं वही इश्यूज को, बाकी डिस्क्रिप्शन तो यू कैन गेट इट इन एनी बुक। Chapter after pages after pages they have written, but there are certain issues which needs to hammer in your head. Needs to be hammered in your head that these are the bothering issues. Suppose a quad wake, it is a huge problem. Where I can get a quad wake? Now Leith Arenite and Leith wake. I will complete my today's class with Leith Arenite and Leith wake. Now if you see the modern day जो टार्बिडाइट्स होते हैं, टार्बिडाइट्स जिसको हम लोग जो टार्बिडाइट्स होते हैं वो मॉडर्न टार्बिडाइट्स आर ऑल लीथ एरेनाइट, all Leith Arenite. Whereas ancient turbidite sequence, if you go to Alps, if you go to Himalaya, they are actually grey wake. Grey wake. Now what is grey wake? Grey wake is a dark colored sedimentary rock with lot of matrix, and if you do the analysis, normal sedimentary rock analysis करने में क्या आता है? Normal sedimentary rock analysis करने में the maximum जो chemical analysis में maximum percentage what we get is the SiO2. Then we get Al2O3. Then we get TiO2. We get K2O. We get Na2O, and we sometimes we also get these are the main. मैं छोटा मोटा जो है उसमें नहीं जा रहा हूँ. SiO2, Al2O3, TiO2, K2O, Na2O. यही मिलता है. Now, if you analyze a Arcos, where K2O will be, because most of them are potash feldspar. So, potash feldspar, whether you get the microcline or orthoclase, whatever, high temperature sanidine is very, very rare. Very, very rare. You only get in some volcanic rustics. जो orthoclase and microcline, they are all potash rich, and that's why those sandstones will be giving you high K2O value. A grey wake instead will give high sodium value. It gives more sodium value. If the more sodium value because of its interaction with the seawater, the turbidite's interaction with the seawater, and it gets the more sodium value. Basically, this is actually this is what is called the matrix problem of grey wake. ये मैट्रिक्स कहां से रहा है? In the grey wake, in the ancient turbidites, though in the present day turbidites are all Leith Arenite, there is hardly any matrix. Why ancient turbidites they are grey wake? Why there is so much of matrix? This is called matrix problem of grey wake. All these matrix, they are actually pseudomatrix. They are actually the decomposed product of the lithic fragments which are present in the modern turbidites, and with age the lithic fragments they decompose and give way to the matrix which are mostly the pseudomatrix. Matrix can be different type. It can be protomatrix, it can be epimatrix, it can be pseudomatrix. Different kinds of matrix are. Pseudomatrix are there which are secondary in origin by the decomposition of the original lithic fragment or the feldspar. Sodic plagioclase. In the Leith Arenite, you get the mode of sodic plagioclase, and that sodic plagioclase also is the responsible for the high sodium content. But the Arcos is a high potassium content. If there is any question, you can ask me.
Sir, in which sort of environment we can expect grey wake?
I am telling you, na, Grey wake is commonly found in the ancient turbidites.
Okay, sir.
And then I am comparing it with modern turbidites. Modern turbidites are litharenite, whereas ancient turbidites are grey wake. And that is the problem. That is the problem. ये जो मैट्रिक्स वाके मैट्रिक्स आ कहां से रहा है, where from it is coming, and then it is identified that they are mostly pseudometrics. देखो मैट्रिक्स जो है ना, you yourself has said that the matrix mechanically deposit होती है. जो मैट्रिक्स, the matrix which mechanically deposited with the framework originally, that is called protomatrix. Fine. Then some matrix that is generated by diagenetic alteration of feldspar alter होके clay होगा ना, feldspar will alter to clay, the lithic fragment is also altered to clay. So that kind of matrix which diagenetically formed, we call it pseudomatrix. And then if this matrix is low grade metamorphosed, then you call it a epimatrix. When it transforms into sericitic mica, the clay is transformed to sericitic mica. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So let us stop here. You people have another class, or there is no class?
Yes, sir. There is Devesh class.
Okay. So I stop here now. It is already 11:35. So I stop here, and we'll meet on Thursday. Thursday we will also have the practical class. Thank you.